And now moving on, we'll move on to our next panel discussion for today. That is on giving boost to startup ecosystem, institutional venture support and initiatives. Now this panel will actually share about how the public government sectors could join hands in order to help startups rise above the pandemic through initiatives, co-investment, supporting startup liquidity, as well as facilitating VC financing, etc., etc., and how they will help bolstering and add value to their startups and to also better tap opportunities in the next normal. So we're very delighted to have engineer Eric Chan. He's the Chief Public Mission Officer of Cyberport, and he will moderate the session for us. Also joining us today are our panelists. We have Mr. Carlos Lam, CEO of Macau Youth Entrepreneur Incubation Center. We have Mr. Duncan Chiu, co-founder and managing director of Radiant Venture Capital. And last but not least, we have Mr. Timothy Yu, CEO of Snapask. And there will be a live poll session for this session, everyone. So please do direct your attention to the screen right now and do copy this link, and you can also make your vote for the live poll. So please do take a look. There's a QR code that you can scan as well. So please just take a moment and do that. And I'll just kind of read off of the live poll right now. Do you agree that government or public sector plays a vital role in supporting startups? Yes or no? So please do let us know what you think. And right now, please do join me to welcome our moderator and panelists to the stage. While Carlos will join us virtually, now I'll pass the floor to Eric. Over to you.
Thank you, and welcome to this afternoon sessions. And I'm delighted to have three panelists of very different background, and I think we have a very good mix. We will be having a very interesting discussions. So we have an investor next to me, Duncan Chiu. We have a very successful startup, Snapask, Timothy. And then we have our partner, ecosystem development partner, Carlos, joining us from Macau online. So should we get started? Okay. So, well, one of the major effort of incubation or ecosystem developer like Cyberport is to actually help our startup find fundings, right? Find the right investors to fill the funding gaps. But in this challenging time, when all this startup business and fundraising have been hit significantly globally, right? Because of COVID and pandemic, and also the socio-political situations. So I want to get a view, from the experts here, be it, from people that are looking for fund or people that are looking for good startup to invest. Can you share with us your views about what you see in Hong Kong, in Macau, and in the region? Could we get started with Duncan?
Okay. I think we have speakers this morning. I think they shared a field of what's happening in the U.S. I think Hong Kong is quite similar to actually what happens in the U.S. If you look at numbers of the venture investments in U.S., I think the amount, the dollar raised is about the same as last year, but it's actually quite split. I mean, most of the deals went to later stage, larger ticket size investment, whereas in the startup area, the earlier stage, I think there's about 40% drop in US. In Hong Kong, I think is more damaging than that because a lot of people become very conservative in terms of long-term investments. So the overall investment, I believe, at the end of the year is going to be lower than what we see last year in 2019. And apart from that, what we will see is the funding option for earlier stage companies is getting more difficult because still a lot of investors are around, they have dry powder, but they tend to invest in later stage per se safer investments and a shorter investment period. So I think some mature startups, they will have no problem raising money or as long as they're not being too aggressive in valuation. But the earlier stage are the area actually will see a prolonged period of difficulty in fundraising because willing investors are smaller, are less today.
And Timothy, I guess you would still be looking for funding, right, for further development of the business. So yeah. What have you experienced?
I guess since the beginning of the year, we've closed our Series B investment, and since then we have been putting a lot of effort in growing the business and expanding our presence in a lot more Asian markets. Regarding how the overall funding environment is, I think it's less about if the capital is there to invest, but whether or not after COVID, is the business still sustainable, and can they still go for the long run, the long game in the new norm? So I guess capital is definitely looking for good companies with a business model that can actually go way beyond, and probably for some that are pretty conventional businesses, they are revamping their original structure and offerings to meet the new situation. So I think overall, because our model is really in education, supporting students who are learning from home when schools are shut down, tutorial schools are shut down. So apparently there is a need for online education, and I think now all the investors are looking for opportunities like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I mean, have you changed any strategy in terms of trying to get the funding you want?
Not really. I think since our business model is very much focused on online education, online learning, it's in principle already set up for this new environment, right? Strategy-wise, of course, when we are doing fundraising, we'll highlight why we are better than our conventional competitor. And now, one of the key message that we have is we are no longer a supplement of the traditional tutorial business, whereby previously Snapask as a platform to help students at home doing self-study. We are merely a supplementary service on top of the traditional tutorial centers. But now, when all these other options are no longer available, and people rethink what education could be done, how it could be done more effectively, we become kind of the only alternative for them, and it's always a better option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No wonder there's a big interest in educational technology, and that's why this year in the CVCF we have actually co-organized a spotlight event, the Edge Ventures, organized by Esperanza. And we managed to attract a lot of Edge Tech specific focused investors, to the conference. So, a friend in Macau, Carlos, how are you doing?
Good. Thank you, Eric.
So what do you see in your part of the world?
Let me give you a brief introduction of what is happening in Macau at this moment. We have conducted a survey earlier this year in order to assess the impact of pandemic on our young entrepreneurs and startup. And based on what we are finding, more than 40% of our members, which is the startups, they are affected in their business, and their revenues are falling by more than 50%. And what bothers them the most is the tight cash flow and the shrink in business demand. But on the other hand, of course, there are some startups which are doing better than before because they can adopt the integration of online and offline business operations. But the pandemic itself caused hardship for many SMEs, of course. But this is also a good tipping point for the entrepreneurs to break through. As you can see from the news, the Macau government have been handling very well during this pandemic, and we have free travel to the mainland China in late August, and we also welcome tourists from the mainland in the end of September. So we cannot call this normal, but we're doing okay at this moment.
So maybe just a quick follow-up questions with Carlos. I mean, has the Macau government, rolled out any specific anti-epidemic scheme to support startups, and how are they doing?
We have. During the pandemic, the Macau government has injected more than 52 billion in local Macau currency, which is around 12% of last year's Macau's GDP, in order to boost up the economy. These 52 billions are used in 5 measures. First, the financial support for employees, small businesses, and self-employed professionals, from $1,500 to up to $200,000 per company, for the companies with less than 20 people. Second, the government relaxed the application requirements for the SME Assistance Program, which is originally required for them to 2 years in business. Right now, they relaxed the application for them to only 1 year in business operation. This is a interest-free loan from the government for up to $600,000. And third, the bank loan interest subsidy program, which is the government will subsidize up to 4% interest rate for a loan of $2 million for SMEs. And fourth, there's a consumption card, which you might know from the news. Each Macau residents are issued a consumption card with a face value of $8,000 from May to the end of this year, for them to use in any sector locally, like grocery, department stores, restaurants, etc. And lastly, the government also launched a program called Macau Ready Go program, which subsidizes each Macau residents to join local tours in order to help the people in the tourism sectors.
Okay, thanks,
These are the
Carlos.
jobs that
It's
our
wonderful.
government is doing.
Yeah, I mean, for Hong Kong, probably many people already know also that the Hong Kong government has also wrote a lot of anti-epidemic assistance, right? So, but some of them are actually specifically targeted to help startups, including some job creation, right? One of them, Cyberport, is actually administrator, which is the fintech Antiepidemic scheme for talent development, where the basically government subsidized startups to create 1,000 jobs. And so far it's going very well. That we already received over 600 applications, and we're still in the middle of getting more applications. And also there are schemes like the 5G early adoption schemes, where it's actually startups, tech companies could get a maximum of $500,000 Hong Kong dollars. Is a matching fund. So a project of 1 million now would only cost $500,000 because of the subsidy of the government, and many of our startups also benefited from it. So, just wondering, I mean, Timothy, have you made use of any of those schemes? I mean, what are you expecting? From the government that might help you in your business. I mean, to survive and also to continue your momentum to grow.
Well, I guess we definitely have received a lot of support from the public sector. So apparently from Cyberport a lot since we've started. In recent years, definitely we have shifted a lot of our focus in growing Snapask outside of Hong Kong. And I think Hong Kong is always a good launch pad for startups, for new ideas and new economies. Since 2015, when we started the company, testing out the business model and making sure the product market fit is here, we very quickly launched our operation in places like Taiwan, in Southeast Asia, Singapore, Malaysia, and even recently we launched in Japan and Korea. So a lot of our focus and emphasis is actually on hiring local talents in all these different markets, supported by the local operations in Hong Kong, which we have all the management and global marketers to support each of the region. So I think overall, definitely we have a lot of help received from the public sector, which is why we can still sustain our operation till today. Yeah.
Right. Thank Thank you. So, Duncan, you have a think tank, right?
Yeah.
The Innovate for Future.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's been reviewing the startup funding gaps and difficulties, in assessing the growth resources.
Yeah.
So, from your think tank, can you share, any views about the roles and importance of public and private sector collaborations effectively helping the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I think we formed the think tank earlier the year with a group of startup entrepreneurs, and we actually study the market and look at what the government can do more, what the public should know more about the startups, and we did several surveys and submit some advocacy to the government. I think further from what Carlos mentioned in Macau, I think we will look at what the COVID impact the tech sector in Hong Kong. I mean, definitely it is quite damaging, but of course we're not as bad as the retail sector or the tourist sector that are really hard hit. I think in the tech scene from our unofficial survey, I would say 70-30 rule. So, I mean, 70% are negative impacted. And there are some people that actually, company that benefit from the COVID. I mean, like Tim here, he might be one of the people that benefit from the COVID situation. So the larger corporations, in fact, are less impacted. They're more ready for work from home. And a lot of people looking for digital transformation and digital solutions. So a lot of the larger corporates, they actually have more business. People doing e-learning or e-health solutions are actually getting momentum, actually. But I mean, the studies we look at in Cyberport and Science Park, where majority of the company are earlier stage, this is the area that a lot of them have negative impacts. I think more than 60% from our survey saying that they have delayed their product, delayed their fundraising, and they have problem with cash flows. So these are the area actually we need to help. So among what you mentioned, a lot of government schemes, I think they're more targeted towards the SME market, and a lot of these startups we have that actually they have big problem. Maybe they in just meeting their clients when they have the product ready, they've done prototyping, they've done POC, and then now they can't even face the client face to face and look at what problem to solve and what additional work they have to be done. And a lot of the large corporate, they're willing to test out some new products previously. They might have other problem that they're facing. Then they have to stop some projects that they collaborate with startups. So this is really impacting a lot of the startups. And I think a lot of the program that the government launch are very innovative because it try to use other ways of subsidy schemes like 5G, which is a vertical sector subsidized program to help the startups. So I think there also is a good start that we have new ways of helping these startups. And the market, of course, we have a lot of different comments. Some say, the process is too slow and things like that. But I think we can always improve, right? At least we have the heart to help the startup. So we also submit some suggestions about how to streamline the vetting process for some of the scheme, like DBs, and how to help the startups when they're most needed, right? When the funding is coming in 6 months, sometimes it's too slow for the startup to stay survive. And these are things we look at. But I mean, one of the things that you mentioned, the public-private sector funding, I think one of the points we raised about Hong Kong is that compare Hong Kong to other country like the US, or maybe you compare to Shenzhen, we have a lot more private investors. We have more VCs in the region, but compared to comparable cities, I think we're still lacking in some area. One, we don't have a government endowment or sovereign fund. We don't have too many endowments like in the US. And you look at mainland China, I think there's reports that states that the LP composition in mainland, a big chunk is government funded. So they back a lot of the venture funds in mainland, where in Hong Kong, this is one gap. We mainly rely on the private sector. And the private sector are very risk-averse when conditions like now, people become very conservative. So the long-term investments are they have strength a lot, which is something that we suggest, if there's government subsidies or some matching scheme that will encourage private investment or long-term investment, that will help the market a lot.
Thank you, Duncan, for sharing your views. So back to Timothy, what do you think startup, will need, in support of, the growth? I mean, the last thing we want to see is a very successful startup like Snapask. You already have a solid plan of, what to do, how to expand, and suddenly COVID comes, and then because of, all these challenges, you stop, or slow down the development. That's the last thing we want to see, right? So, I mean, what can government or incubators like Cyberport could do, extra to help?
Well, I will always say there are a couple of things that a company would need the most. Definitely, number one is people, well-skilled people, talents that you can hire in the region or outside of the region. And second of all, definitely capital. But these two, we shouldn't always expect the government or public sector to provide just people and capital for any company, because it's a free market. But there are certainly ways that the public sector can involve definitely during this tough shift, not just to help the company, but probably to help the public by channeling the right tools for them at the right time. So let me just make an example. So from March until probably July, August, there are these local schools in Hong Kong that are shut down. It's not just in Hong Kong. There are tons of other countries that experience the same thing. And it creates a very tough moment for teachers, because they have to go online. Suddenly, they have to be an online teacher to host an online class. But they're not trained that way. There is no proper tool for them. And they just have to do it themselves. And suddenly, they become a YouTuber. They become a KOL. They have to create their own content to engage with students. During this time, I think we as an ed tech company definitely can do a lot to support these teachers. But one big hurdle, the biggest hurdle for us is at the end of the day, public sector, like public schools or government subsidized schools, it's tough to start engaging just at that moment and start a contract with them. So I think government can definitely do a lot during this moment to speed up the process, to actually channel funding or channel, at least have focus on connecting public sector with the right tools to support them at this pandemic. So that's what I think the public sector and government can do.
Okay. But EdTech in this challenging time seems to be one of the few industry that is actually seeing growth, right? Because of this digital transformation,
right?
And they were, not stopping to learn, but even the classes stop, right? That's the thing.
Right.
So, I mean, from that perspective, I know that the government, the OGCIO is already, penning out fundings for creating IT lab and in secondary schools and things like that. How does that kind of affecting EdTech company like yours?
I would say it's still they're trying to do it, but it's probably slower than expected. Then I just hope the resources just teachers can receive support at the right time. But apparently the scheme is just not moving fast enough. Digital transformation has been happening for years. The entire pandemic is just accelerating it, that people have no choice but to use it. I think just as an example, so we have been working very closely with the government in other markets. For example, Taiwan, in Singapore. So right after the pandemic hits, they can right away start a program with us to start launching Snapask and some of the service, even if it's white labeled, to offer students and teachers at school that are affected by the pandemic to already have stay-at-home learning with the right tools. And for Hong Kong, probably it would take twice or triple the time in order for that to happen. So I would say that's something for us to think about.
Speed, right?
Exactly.
Thank you. So Carlos, I'm glad that we have actually recently signed an MOU with MYEIC. So to strengthen our kind of mutual collaborations in offering reciprocal support to startups in both Hong Kong and Macau. So can you tell us what your center is focusing to support startup growth, and how do you think Cyberport and your center could leverage each other's strength to scale and also to help startup in this difficult time?
Okay, first of all, a little background of our center. Our incubation center was established by the Economic Bureau of the Macau government in 2015. But in 2017, the Economic Bureau commissioned our company, PFM, which is also fully government-funded company, to operate and manage the center. What we do is to build the bridges between any other incubation and accelerator in Hong Kong, Macau, the GBA area, as well as the Portuguese-speaking countries. We do have many connections in, of course, the GBA area. We have signed cooperation agreement with all citizens in the GBA, as well as Portugal and Brazil, which is the two main Portuguese-speaking countries around the world. So we're happy to share our resources to with Cyberport to promote the growth of the startups in both places. As we all know, the Cyberport is Hong Kong's leading incubator and accelerator, focusing on several digital technologies. It houses the largest fintech community in the city and has different funding schemes for eligible emerging companies. We look forward to leverage the Cyberport's venture capital experience and strength to provide Macau startups with more strategic suggestions and to create more opportunities for them to explore the Hong Kong market as well as the international market through Hong Kong Cyberport. And we also look forward that we can go to Hong Kong very soon.
Yes, the travel bubble, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So, I mean, just to remind all the audience that you can actually post questions, and then to our panelists, address to anyone or to all of the panelists, right? So one question is, what's any advices from you guys, on to startups that are looking for money in this, especially when, Duncan, you mentioned about the early stage, where most of the investors seems to be now, shifting towards the more mature and the later stage, right? So for early stage startups, what would be your advice to them in getting the money they need for growth?
Yeah, I think just extend the runway. We talked to a lot of startups earlier of the year. Extend the runway. Expect the market, the fundraising market, to actually suspend for I wouldn't say prolong, but some time. But I think now we come to a stage that we should actually be thinking about post-COVID. I think at most it's just going to be a few months more, hopefully, that we have to at this stagnant position at the moment. I believe a lot of the funds, they still have dry powder. They have a fasting period, so they become more conservative and also want to look at post-COVID, what the world is going to be. I think we're getting more clarity, hopefully, especially with the election things and all the politics that is happening. I think post-COVID, things will gradually come back to normal, hopefully a few more months. And of course, Hong Kong, there's a lot of subsidies from, let's say, Cyberport, Science Park. We have the rental concessions and, schemes that actually can help startup extend the runway, so they can have subsidies for hiring, R&D persons and stuff. So make use of those programs. I think positively, next year will be a very good year for fundraising opportunities. So make sure you extend your runway until end of next year, and fund will come back.
Yeah, thank you for pointing out, Duncan. definitely, I think this currently, the challenging time is a time for survival. And we understand it. And that's why, in our planning earlier this year, we have actually decided to set up a dedicated team. We call it Act for Fund, right? It's access through Cyberport to funding, right? And basically, we try to help our startups to look at all these different schemes, from the government, so that they could leverage on, to basically survive and also, keep the growth momentum, right? So, Timothy, any tips for your fellow startups in terms of fundraising in this difficult time?
I'm not sure if I'm qualified to give these advice, but just as an operator of a company, I think previously we have a lot to really focus on startups and new technology, new economy versus the conventional industry. But during COVID and post-COVID, the line between new businesses, new technology, and conventional is becoming thinner and thinner. It means traditional businesses, because they know how they're in a very disadvantaged position during COVID. They realize that, and there's a lot of them who will start to revamp their business and reinvent some parts of it to face the new world. So one example is definitely in our industry, tutorial schools. They start to host their classes online. They start to do create a lot more offerings and value for their students online, because they know just keeping themselves offline won't work anymore. And people are very much open up to the new technology and new economy. So I would say competition for startups in the future will no longer just be with other technology company. It will also be a wave of traditional companies that are revamped, and they will probably be one of your biggest competitor in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I've got a follow-on questions directed to Duncan. So it says, because you just mentioned, so the question is, why next year is good for funding, and what are the investors looking for? I mean, what are you looking for as an investor, and how to stay competitive?
Yeah, I think we look at challenges and also we look at opportunities. I think challenges is we all know that the China-US conflicts is going to be a long-term one. So a lot of repositioning. I think that also provides some opportunities for Hong Kong and mainland China. Definitely, we know that technology is the number one thing all countries are putting resources into, and we are all fighting for talents. And I think long run, China is a huge market, and how to have better integration, mainland and Hong Kong is definitely the way forward. And we can see more effort and resources will be put into, let's say, deep tech, R&D from mainland government, and also definitely from Hong Kong government as well. So I think that create a pipeline that actually we built this startup ecosystem in the last 10 years, and then we have a lot of entrepreneurs in Hong Kong. They are now experienced, but we still need a bigger playing field. I mean, a bigger market for a lot of the startups to actually expand into. I hopefully think with what's happening, China is going to buy more local products. They will support more R&D effort. They will have more scheme for bringing in talents, and Hong Kong has a part to do with that. Mm-hmm. And I think the entrepreneurs that we see, the investors that we see now in Hong Kong are more sophisticated, are more experienced compared to 10 years, 20 years ago. And more funds are actually looking at the market here. Previously, a lot of funds in Hong Kong, they mainly invest in mainland or somewhere in Asia, but not necessarily in Hong Kong. We see the trend, we're having more funds interested in the area. But of course, we have to show how, maybe Hong Kong Shenzhen integration, a lot of people is talking about that, what will come out. And but I think long term, 1.4 billion people, and technology is one thing you can see. China is very open-minded to adopt, and that is huge opportunities. And I think talents is one area that Hong Kong still has the attraction to. I think a lot of these foreign talents, they might choose Hong Kong. I actually see some coming through the pipeline. And so long run, I think we still have, 5-10 years is going to be a very big growth market. And, I think there's still, I still look positive for that, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is definitely a view that we share. We always try to persuade overseas school startups to come to Hong Kong and use Hong Kong as a launch pad, because actually we could help them to go into the Greater Bay Area of China, as well as the ASEAN countries, the neighboring countries in Hong Kong. So Carlos, any final advice to the startups that you are helping? We only got 1 minute or so.
Yeah, I would say go GBA or international, because the market in Macau is way too small. That's why we have the GBA concept. And I'm not asking people to leave Macau and forever, but to expand their market or their business to the GBA area. We do have successful cases in Macau locally. One of our members, which is an online education online platform, they get a round of fund locally in Macau, but still, I would say the funding in Macau is too conservative, as Duncan just mentioned before. China is a huge market, and a lot of venture capital fund are backed by the government. If they are looking for fund, why not go GBA?
Okay, thank you, Carlos. So I think we are running out of time. I would like to just make a final comment that yes, definitely we want to work together with Macau and all the 9 cities in GBA areas to help the startups for a bigger market, for more fundings, and also to help people using the GBA and expand outside of China, right? So with that, I want to thank all the panelists today.
Thank you.
For very insightful sharing. Thanks to our friends in Macau, Carlos joining us through online, and Duncan and Timothy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay.